Hello, and welcome to the From Nature to Nurture podcast. My name is Danielle, and here we are with episode number 2. When I first had this podcast idea, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for my first real episode outside of the intro. So I was thinking about it, and I love plant folklore, I love herbal medicine, but what I decided to settle on is a plant profile. Now, I chose this plant specifically because it is a really safe, beginner-friendly plant. I know that herbalism is so overwhelming and confusing when you're first starting, so I wanted to give everyone who's interested a really easy plant to work with so they could start now as they are continuing down their herbal path. So before I get into the actual plant, I want to cover a few terms to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first term I'm going to cover is an herbal energetic. Now, an herbal energetic is the way that humans have understood the medicinal values of plants around how they taste, feel, and work in the body. So this covers temperature, moisture, and tone. Within those 3 broad categories, we have the subcategories of if the plant is warming or cooling, drying or moistening, or if it's relaxing or tonifying / tightening. The reason that this is important is because each of our health issues, as well as our own individual bodies, have certain energetic patterns. So I think the best way to help people wrap their heads around herbal energetics is in this example. So think about a cough. One of the biggest issues in herbalism is people will say, "Oh, what can I take for a cough? What can I take for a cold?" And people are just, "Oh, this plant is said to be good for a cough. Let's throw in some mullein. Let's throw in some echinacea, what have you," but they don't look at the energetics of the plant. Now, when you think about a cough, there are so many different nuances to coughs. So you could have a really wet, boggy cough where you're just drowning in phlegm, or you can have a really dry cough where just can't stop coughing because it's so dry and irritated and you can't get a good productive cough in. So if you look at those 2 totally opposite types of coughs, you wouldn't use the same plant because mullein, for example, it's a really drying plant. So if you have someone that has a really dry cough, giving them a drying plant is going to make it worse. You're not going to get better. So herbal energetics are really important for formulation, for working with especially these acute issues, and they can really help us learn so much about the plant. The other term that I want to cover is an herbal action. So an herbal action describes how the plant works in the body. This tells you what action the plant is taking in the body. So a really good example of that is a diuretic. I feel like a diuretic is a term that a lot of us know, but if you don't, a diuretic helps to flush fluids through your body. It can help with edema, help with swelling, help with detoxification. And so when you look at an action versus an energetic, you can see that, oh, a diuretic is a drying energetic. So there's a correlation between the 2, of course, but yeah, so an herbal action tells you how the plant is acting on the body. It'll also tell you certain organ affinities or body system affinities as well. So typically if a plant is a strong diuretic, it's going to have a strong correlation to the urinary tract system because that's predominantly how we flush fluids out of our body. Now that we have those terms kind of handled, as we go through the rest of this plant profile, I will bring up words that you probably haven't heard of if you're new to herbalism, and we will cover those together. So before we get into the actual plant information, I want to discuss why I chose this plant. This plant is extremely safe. There are no contraindications or drug interactions that are known currently. It is abundant to find out in the wild, and it is a super multifaceted plant. So, the plant that we are working with today is plantain. Also, the Latin names are, there's two different varieties that we commonly work with. So that would be Plantago major and Plantago lanceolata, or we have that are commonly called broadleaf plantain or narrowleaf plantain. Now, these are not the banana plantains. These are a weed, which I say in quotation marks, that commonly grows everywhere. I mean, this is the plant that's popping up in the sidewalks, in the cracks in the parking lots. It's taking over lawns, and it is a plant that you'll normally see growing in highly disrupted areas. It's one of the first plants that starts growing in an area that maybe has like previously been bulldozed a lot or whatever, really roughed up, and it's one of the first plants that will start growing to kind of help fix that soil, get everything ready for the rest of the natives to come in. Now, there's two varieties. You can use them both the same, so I'm not going to go into each of them individually, but let's look at the energetics. So, plantain is a really unique combination. So, it's not the best one to start with in this term, but it is both moistening and drying at the same time. You ask, how is that possible? Well, plants have a innate intelligence to them, as well as our bodies do as well. So the plants work with our bodies to see, what do you need? Do you need a moistening benefit right now? Do you need a drying benefit right now? There's a couple other plants that I will speak about in future episodes that also have this duality to them that's really interesting. So, like I said, it's a little bit moistening and a little bit drying, kind of depending on which system it's working on. And then it's bitter, astringent, which means is another term for like drying and tightening. And then it's a little sweet, and mucilaginous. So, mucilaginous is that moistening portion. So, a mucilaginous plant is characteristic of having like that gummy, mucusy kind of texture, for lack of a better word. It sounds gross, but if you know, you know. So just by looking at those energetics, we can kind of determine what the herbal actions are going to be. So it's a diuretic, like we just talked about before. So drying, helping to move fluids through the urinary tract, through the kidneys, and can be a really potent ally for urinary tract infections. Because it's also a demulcent, which is a soothing, moistening quality, it's a really interesting combination along with that astringent quality that we talked about, because it can soothe and calm UTIs and moisten and tone the mucosal membranes to help soothe that dryness and bleeding and disruption in the urinary tract. We just talked about a demulcent, how it soothes and moistens the mucosal membranes in the urinary tract, but also has an affinity for the respiratory and digestive system. Typically, if you're wanting to work with a plant for its demulcent or mucilaginous qualities, you need cool water is normally what extracts that out, but we'll talk a little bit more about preparations towards the end. It is also an inflammation modulator. So I and many other herbalists that I know don't use the term anti-inflammatory, because sometimes inflammation is needed. Inflammation is our body's immune response to trying to protect an area, trying to heal an area. And so think about when you have like an acute injury, like an ankle sprain, you need that inflammation there to help stabilize that area. It's trying to protect and heal that area. You don't want to just take away all inflammation. But also the term anti-inflammatory is a bit of a misnomer, because nothing is really anti-inflammatory. It's more balancing of inflammation, which is why we use the term inflammation modulation. So, again, this plant has an affinity to the urinary, respiratory, and digestive system, and it's a great topical preparation as well. So think about inflammation in those areas. Super helpful. It's also an moistening expectorant. This is great for dry coughs. Expectorants help to push things up and out. So think about like those really dry coughs where you can't get that production, can't get that tickle out of your throat. This is a great plant for that, because it's going to help moisten that dryness and then help you push all of that phlegm that's kind of stuck down inside. It also has a wonderful ability for a lingering cough and to help draw out infection, and is a great plant for smokers to be able to cleanse and push out everything out of their lungs. Now, one of the most popular reasons why this plant is worked with is because of its first aid abilities. So, like we said, it's an astringent, but it's also a vulnerary. A vulnerary helps to heal wounds essentially. It also helps to staunch bleeding internally and externally. And it has this really interesting drawing ability similar to that of activated charcoal or different clays, where you can use this plant to draw out infection, slivers, stuff from bug bites, tick bites. When you use it topically to help draw things out into the surface. An interesting example, personally, I've used this plant a lot because I'm outside a lot, and so, I get stings, I get bites. But more recently, I have a giant cactus in my office, and I got one of the needles stuck in the bottom of my foot. I tried to pull it out, but it broke off, and so it just kind of got pushed deeper with the tweezers. So what I did was I went outside and grabbed some plantain, and I made a poultice. Now, a poultice is where you take that plant material and you mush it up, normally in your mouth, to kind of really break it open and get a good, like squishy section of it. I don't know how else to describe it. It's one of those things you need to see in person. But you, yeah, you mush it up and then you put it on that wound. And then you put a bandage over it and just let it sit for a few hours. So after a few hours, it was drawn to the surface so that I could pull that cactus needle out. But I've also worked with this plant for bee stings, different bug bites. You'll see it commonly in tick products because of that drawing ability, to be able to draw any of that like tick-borne illness problems to the top so you could get it out of your body. And then it's also an antiseptic, so just like a wonderful first aid plant topically. But anything that is a vulnerary, anything that you can use topically to heal wounds, you can also work with internally. So think about like ulcers or leaky gut or dental issues, any sort of internal infections or wounds, to help heal and draw out any of that inflammation, that infection, whatever have you, and to help heal those areas as well. So this is a wonderful, wonderful plant, super easy to find. If you just look up plantain weed, you're gonna immediately recognize it, and it's a really great plant to teach kids as well, because they're running around everywhere and scraping their knees and getting the bug bites and whatever. And because it's so abundant and it doesn't look like anything else, it's a really great one to teach your kids, and they can make their own little poultices and put on their little wounds, and it's super adorable. In terms of other ways to work with plantain, you can also work with it as a tincture. If you're going to do a fresh tincture, you're going to be looking at a 1-to-3 ratio at 50% alcohol. So let's break up some of those terms just in case you don't know. A tincture is an alcohol infusion. Essentially, you take a jar, you fill it up with the plants. With it being a 1-to-3 ratio, it would be like 1 cup of the plant to 3 cups of alcohol. And you just mix them all into a jar together and you let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks. And then you strain it out and you use the liquid. So that's a very basic explanation of a tincture. Different plants require different percentages of alcohol or different ratios, but that's just bare minimum basics. So as a tincture, you could use that topically or internally as well. Then we have an infusion, which is basically a tea. You can do fresh or dried. Dried leaves will need that cool water, and fresh leaves will need hot water, especially that cool water, especially if you're trying to draw out that like demulcent or mucilaginous quality, because like I said, anything that kind of creates that gummy texture, you need cool water to extract that out. You can also juice the leaves and then freeze them, so then you can just, pop the juice into a tea, or, pop it on a wound, what have you. And then one really interesting preparation is a medicated clay. So you can basically create a strong infusion and then you mix in clay to make a paste. Now, that paste you then put on your topical wound, normally about a half inch to an inch thick, and then you cover it with a wet cloth soaked in that infusion and you leave it on for at least an hour. This medicated clay is if you need serious drawing power. I have heard of people using it with like snake bites or black widow brown recluse bites, or if someone has like a bee allergy, like using it on the bee sting. Like, it's crazy powerful because you are combining that drawing ability from the plantain but also from the clay. So you can use it on lesser wounds. It's a bigger project and you might as well just use like a salve, but crazy potent. And then, yeah, I just mentioned the last preparation is a salve. That would be infusing an oil and then mixing it with beeswax to create that kind of salve consistency. And then that would be a good first aid preparation to carry around. I know that I normally have a plantain salve in my first aid kit for that drawing ability and that wound healing ability. So that is our first little plant profile. It's a wonderful, simple plant to work with. I wanted to pick something that was really easy and, didn't have a lot of lookalikes. You don't have to worry about misidentifying. Like I said, you could use either type of plantain. We do have a native plantain. It looks like the broadleaf plantain, but it has a little bit of red in the center of it. So that's really the only difference. But native plants are always fun to work with. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. And I hope that you find this new plant friend to work with and get to experiment. If you would like to learn more about my offerings, you can find my information at rootandwandercollective.com, and I hope to see you along the plant path.